"This is fake," the waitress told the Mafia boss in perfect Italian, saving him from $250. M-Bank scam. The city of Aranthia was not a place for ordinary hearts. Its towers of blackened stone and golden spires reached into the stormy sky like claws trying to grasp the clouds. Rain-slicked streets reflected lantern light in 1,000 fractured patterns, and shadows moved like living things among the narrow alleys. Here, power was a language spoken in whispers and fear, and only those who could see the cracks in the world could survive. At the heart of this city ruled the man called the King of Thorns. His reputation alone was enough to bend people's knees and silence even the bravest of voices. Some said his eyes were like polished obsidian, reflecting the darkness inside him. Others claimed that his touch could ignite loyalty or destruction, depending on his whim. No one knew the truth of him, not fully, because he was both feared and admired in equal measure. Yet behind that fearsome mask, the king carried a secret he had never admitted even to himself, a hollow, lonely ache that had grown over years of betrayal and isolation. Selene moved through this city like a shadow, though a far more subtle and dangerous one. To the casual observer, she was nothing more than a waitress in the luminous lantern, a floating tavern that hovered over the canal waters like a giant golden boat. The tavern was a place where nobles came to hide their secrets, thieves came to trade lies, and whispers of magic drifted among the steaming mugs of wine and bread. Selene moved quietly between tables, her dark hair tied back, her hands steady and her eyes always watching. She had learned early that silence was often more powerful than speech, but sometimes words could save lives or ruin them. It was during a storm that the city seemed at its most dangerous. Lightning tore across the sky, illuminating the jagged rooftops and the serpentine streets below. Selene was carrying a tray of drinks when she noticed it, a parchment glowing faintly with enchanted ink, placed carelessly on one of the king's private tables. She had served him often enough to know when something was amiss, and this parchment did not belong there. Its edges shimmered with a subtle spell that could only mean one thing, a trap. She hesitated, her heart hammering. To approach the king directly was dangerous. Most would have avoided it at all costs, but she could not walk away. Something inside her urged her forward, a mix of instinct, courage, and the quiet knowledge that some truths could not be ignored. She stepped lightly across the polished floor, her footsteps careful but confident. "Your Majesty," she said softly, bowing her head, this is fake." The king looked up from his table, his expression unreadable. For a moment the storm outside seemed to pause, and the air between them grew taut, electric. Selene's words, simple and clear, carried a weight that no one else could have given them. "Explain," the king demanded, his voice low and sharp like steel against stone. Selene took a breath and stepped closer, keeping her hands visible to show she bore no weapon. "This contract," she said, gesturing to the glowing parchment, "is a trap. Someone wants to take your gold, your power, everything. They have used spells to make it look real, but it is false. If you sign, you will lose 250 million gold coins, and worse, it will bind you to a curse stronger than any I have seen." For a heartbeat, the king did nothing but study her. No one had ever dared speak to him with such certainty, and yet she did not tremble. Her calmness was like a blade. It cut through his defenses, sharp and precise. A strange feeling stirred in his chest, a mix of admiration, suspicion, and something he could not yet name. "Why would you care?" he asked finally. His voice carried the weight of years of distrust, of court intrigues and betrayals. "Why risk yourself for a stranger?" Selene met his gaze, unwavering. "Because I see truth," she said simply, "and sometimes truth is worth the risk." The king leaned back, his eyes narrowing, studying her like one studies an unfamiliar gem. He saw not only courage but intelligence, sharp and precise. There was something in her that reminded him of himself, or perhaps of what he had once been before power had carved out his heart. For the first time in years, he felt the fragile stirrings of trust, tempered by the knowledge that trust was dangerous and sometimes deadly. "I should have you arrested," he said, half in jest, half in seriousness. "Do you understand that?" "I understand," Cellini replied. "But I also understand that in this city, silence can be deadly and truth can be more dangerous." Lightning split the sky again, and the king felt a shiver he could not explain. It was not the storm outside, but the storm she had brought into his life simply by speaking the truth. He studied her for a long moment, and for reasons he could not explain, he found himself intrigued, drawn, almost unwilling to look away. Later, as the tavern emptied and the rain continued to drum against the windows, the king watched Cellini from a distance. She moved with quiet precision, arranging the tables, collecting mugs, her eyes scanning every corner. There was an energy about her, subtle but undeniable, that unsettled him. He realized that her warning had saved him, but more than that, her presence unsettled something deep within him, a feeling he had not allowed himself to experience for decades. Cellini, for her part, was unaware of the effect she had on the king. She had done what she could, as she always had, guided by intuition and knowledge. Yet even she felt the tension, the silent pull between them, a bond formed in the smallest, most dangerous of moments. It was a connection that neither dared to name, but both could feel its weight pressing against the edges of their hearts. That night, the king's dreams were restless. He found himself walking through the city, but it was not the city he knew. It was a twisted version, filled with shifting shadows and whispering voices. And in the center of it all stood Cellini, her eyes bright with warning and something more, something he could not yet comprehend. She spoke, but the words were like wind through hollow trees, impossible to grasp fully. "This is only the beginning," the shadowed Cellini said. "Choices will come, hearts will break, only truth can save you." He woke with a start, the echoes of her words lingering like smoke in the room. For the first time in a long while he felt uncertain, vulnerable, and perhaps alive. By morning the city had returned to its usual rhythm. Merchants shouted, horses clattered over cobblestones, and the spires gleamed wet in the rising sun. The king dressed with unusual care, his mind restless, returning to the memory of her voice, her eyes, her courage. He found himself thinking of her not as a servant, not as a passerby, but as someone who had touched the hidden corners of his life, someone who had forced him to see a danger he had not noticed. Cellini arrived at her station, carrying trays of bread and wine, her expression calm and measured. She did not know that the king had watched her, that he had felt a shift inside him. And yet fate has its own design, weaving people into each other's lives in ways that cannot be foreseen. It was in the quiet moments between the rush of patrons that they met again. The king stepped close, his voice low and deliberate. "You saved me," he said, almost reluctantly. "But do you understand the danger you bring upon yourself by speaking so freely?" "I understand," Cellini replied, meeting his gaze with quiet determination. "But danger is always present here. And sometimes to live, we must speak the truth, even when it terrifies us." A silence fell between them, heavy with unsaid words, with feelings neither could yet name. The storm outside had passed, but inside the walls of the tavern another storm had begun, a storm of tension, of curiosity, and of a strange, dangerous connection neither could deny. As the day waned, the king retreated to his private chambers, but he could not forget her. Her courage, her intelligence, the fire in her quiet eyes, it haunted him. And somewhere deep inside, he sensed that this was only the beginning of something larger, something that would test them both in ways neither could yet imagine. Cellini, too, felt the weight of the encounter. She had acted out of instinct, out of a sense of justice and survival. But she could not ignore the king's presence in her thoughts, the strange pull she felt when their eyes had met. She was wary, of course. He was powerful, dangerous, and his world was full of shadows. Yet she could not deny that he had touched something inside her, something she had long kept hidden. And so, the city of Aranthia continued on, unaware that two lives had crossed in a moment of truth, that a warning had altered the course of power, and that a spark had been lit that neither the king nor the waitress could yet extinguish. As night fell and the city settled into uneasy slumber, both of them lay awake in separate rooms, haunted by the same thought. Some meetings are not mere chance, and some warnings carry a destiny far greater than the danger they promise. Outside, the storm clouds had cleared, leaving a silver moon suspended over the darkened city. And somewhere between the golden spires and the shadowed alleys, two hearts waited, unknowingly bound together by courage, fate, and the faintest whisper of something that might grow into love or destruction. And as the first stars of night blinked into existence, the king felt a premonition he could not ignore. The city, the gold, the power, none of it mattered as much as the warning that had found him through a simple waitress with the courage to speak. For in that warning, he felt the stirrings of something eternal, something that would demand more than caution, more than fear, and perhaps more than he was willing to give. And with that thought, the city held its breath, waiting for the next move in a game far older and darker than either of them could yet see. The morning after Seleni's warning, the King of Thorns could not focus on the affairs of his court. His palace was filled with the usual clatter of advisors, merchants, and guards, yet their words seemed to drift around him, meaningless. His thoughts returned again and again to the waitress, to her calm certainty, to the sharp intelligence in her eyes. A strange unease had settled in his chest, a feeling he had not experienced in years, vulnerability mixed with curiosity and something darker, something like longing. He did not admit it, not even to himself. The king had learned long ago that attachment was a dangerous weakness, a thread that enemies could pull to unravel a life built on power and fear. Yet Seleni's words had struck deeper than any dagger, deeper than any threat he had faced in his rise to the throne. She had spoken truth, and truth in Aranthia was a rare, perilous treasure. Selene, meanwhile, moved through the tavern with her usual grace, though her thoughts were heavy. She had done her duty, but the king's gaze haunted her. There was power in him, yes, but also a darkness that clung to his soul like a shadow. She could see it in the way he measured everyone around him, in the cold precision of his movements. She also knew that beneath that fearsome exterior, he carried wounds, wounds that could either make him crueler or, if guided rightly, stronger. The danger of the city was not limited to contracts and gold. Beneath the cobbled streets and glittering towers, Aranthia's underworld was alive with whispers of magic, forbidden pacts, and ancient curses. It was a place where the air itself seemed thick with secrets, where a misplaced step could lead to ruin, and where even the King of Thorns could be ensnared if he was careless. It was to this underworld that the king descended that day, seeking Selene. He did not announce his presence. He did not demand her attention. Instead, he moved like a shadow, slipping through narrow streets and fog-drenched alleys until he reached the tavern. There, she served patrons as usual, her expression calm, her hands steady. Yet when she sensed him in the room, her heart skipped a beat. Not out of fear, she had faced danger before, but out of recognition. Something in the air had changed. "You should not have spoken to me yesterday," the king said softly, stepping into the dim light of the tavern. His voice, though quiet, carried authority. It was a voice that could command armies, that could bend people to his will, yet now it trembled slightly with the pull of something new. Selene met his gaze, holding it firmly. "And you should not ignore truth," she replied. "But I suppose neither of us are perfect." For a moment, silence stretched between them. It was a silence filled with tension, with unspoken questions, with a fragile curiosity neither had yet named. The king studied her, and in her eyes he saw not fear, not obedience, but insight. Insight sharpened by necessity, honed by survival, and illuminated by courage. "I need to understand how you knew," he said finally. "If you are right, then this contract is not just a trick of thieves. It is magical, dangerous magic. And if you are wrong—" He left the words hanging, and the threat behind them was clear. Selene took a deep breath. She could not tell him everything, not yet. Some truths were too dangerous, even for him. But she could give him enough to keep him alive, to guide him through the first layers of the trap. "The contract is forged with illusions," she explained, moving closer to the table where it had been left. "It appears real to anyone who reads it, even to those skilled in magic. It carries a curse that will bind the king's wealth to the schemer's will, but also something worse. It will seep into the heart of the palace, poisoning loyalty, trust, and even love. You will not see it coming until it is too late." The king listened, his fingers curling into fists at his sides. He had faced curses before, of course, ancient bindings, whispered hexes, and shadowed prophecies, but nothing like this. It was subtle, intricate, and frighteningly clever. And yet he could not help but be drawn to Selene, drawn to the clarity of her mind, the unwavering steadiness in her posture, the strange, magnetic pull of her presence. "Why help me?" he asked again, unable to hide the curiosity in his voice this time. "You could walk away. You could remain safe in your little floating tavern. Why risk yourself for a king who could crush you with a single thought?" Selene's gaze did not falter. "Because someone must see the truth," she said. "Because power is not meant to be taken blindly, and fear is not meant to rule. If I can help you avoid ruin, I will. And perhaps, if I can guide you, you will become the king the city needs, not the king it fears." The words struck him like a hammer. He had been feared all his life, taught to inspire terror, to measure loyalty in trembling hearts and silent obedience. And yet here was a stranger, a simple waitress, speaking to him not with fear, not with reverence, but with quiet conviction. The idea unsettled him, challenged the very foundation of his existence. "Very well," he said at last, his voice low but firm. "Show me." Selene nodded. "There are layers to this magic," she said. "First, the contract itself. Then the shadows that guard it. Then the ones who cast it. We must be cautious. One wrong step, one miscalculated move, and all could be lost." The king followed her through the winding streets of Aranthea, moving quietly, observing as she navigated alleys and hidden stairways with ease. He noticed, for the first time in many years, that someone could move through his city without fear, without hesitation, guided by instinct and knowledge he had long forgotten. And in that observation, a strange admiration grew, tangled with an unfamiliar warmth he did not understand. They entered the underworld together, a place of echoes and shadowed corridors. Here the air was heavy with the scent of old magic, of stone dampened by centuries, and of secrets better left undiscovered. The walls seemed to pulse with whispered voices, soft and hypnotic, warning them of dangers unseen. Selene moved confidently, explaining each mark, each symbol, each faint glow in the air as they passed. The king listened, learning, questioning, marveling at her insight. At the center of the underworld they found the vault. Its doors were carved with twisting runes that shimmered in the dim light, alive with an intelligence of their own. It was not merely locked. It demanded truth, trust, and a willingness to confront the fears hidden deep within the heart. "You must touch it together," Selene said. "It will only open if we both reveal what we carry inside. If either of us hides, the magic will strike." The king hesitated. He had spent decades building walls around himself, hiding pain, fear, and weakness. To reveal these to another, even to someone as perceptive as Selene, was unthinkable. Yet the idea of failure, of the curse taking root and destroying everything, left him no choice. He reached out, and she did the same, their hands brushing as they touched the glowing surface. Visions filled their minds, memories of betrayal, of regret, of choices made and paths forsaken. The king saw the faces of those he had wronged, the enemies he had created, and the loneliness that had festered inside him. Selene saw the echoes of her curse, the weight of a family bound to secrets and warnings, and the fear of losing herself to power she had never sought. For a long moment, neither spoke. The magic pulsed around them, testing their courage, testing their willingness to be honest, to be vulnerable. And then slowly, the vault began to glow brighter, the runes shifting, reshaping, as if acknowledging their courage. The doors opened with a sound like sighing wind. Inside lay not only the contract but the shadows of those who had created it, ghostly forms that whispered promises, threats, and lies. The king and Selene stepped forward, facing them together. He was no longer alone. She was no longer merely a guide. They were partners in a battle neither had expected, their fates now entwined in ways neither could fully predict. As they moved through the vault, the shadows recoiled, then vanished, leaving only silence. For a brief moment, victory seemed possible. Yet the vault whispered one final warning. One heart must break to save the kingdom. Selene staggered back, clutching her chest as if struck by a force unseen. The king rushed to her side, his own heart pounding with fear, anger, and something he could not name. He realized in that instant that the danger had not ended, it had only begun. The prophecy was a challenge, a test not only of power but of trust, courage, and love. He lifted her gently, supporting her as they left the vault. Outside, the city waited, indifferent and unknowable. But inside their hearts, a new tension had taken root. The knowledge that their fates were bound together, that the warnings they had faced were only the first of many, and that choices would come demanding sacrifice, courage, and perhaps heartbreak. As they emerged into the moonlit streets of Aranthea, the king felt a strange vulnerability he could not name, and Selene felt a pull toward him she could not explain. For the first time, neither could deny the weight of the other's presence, the silent understanding that they had begun something neither could walk away from, and that the city itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. And somewhere in the shadows, hidden among the alleys and towers, the true schemers of the contract watched, their eyes gleaming with amusement and malice. They had underestimated both the king and the waitress, and they would learn, too late, that courage and truth could be as dangerous as any curse or weapon. The night grew darker, the stars hidden behind clouds, and the city seemed to shiver under the quiet tension of impending trials. The king and Selene stood together, silent, aware that the next steps would demand everything. Wisdom, trust, bravery, and the willingness to confront fears neither had ever shared with another soul. And with that, part two of their journey came to its first terrifying, poignant pause, leaving both of them on the edge of destiny, aware that the shadows of Aranthea were far from done with them. The city of Aranthea slept under a pale moon, yet the night was far from peaceful. In the shadows of its spired towers and narrow alleys, danger moved like a living thing. The King of Thorns and Selene, having survived the vault's magical trial, were now bound together not only by necessity but by a fragile, growing trust. Each step they took felt heavier than the last, for the warning whispered in the vault haunted them still. One heart must break to save the kingdom. Selene leaned against the cold stone wall of the tavern's hidden rear entrance, her eyes scanning the alley. The wind tugged at her cloak, carrying with it the scent of rain-soaked cobblestones and the faint iron tang of blood. She could sense them, shadowed assassins moving like smoke through the streets, former allies of the schemers who had crafted the false contract. They were clever, patient, and relentless. Their goal was not only gold but vengeance. The king stepped beside her, his tall figure casting a long shadow. He was dressed in muted leather and dark velvet, blending with the night, yet his presence radiated authority. Even here, away from the palace, his aura commanded attention. Selene noticed how his hand brushed briefly against the hilt of his sword, a subtle but unmistakable reminder that he was dangerous in more ways than one. "We cannot stay in the city," she said softly. The assassins will track us. They know we survived the vault. He nodded. Then we leave, he replied, his voice steady but quiet. There was an intensity in his gaze as he looked at her, a mixture of admiration, caution, and something unspoken, a pull neither had named yet. Where do we go? Selene considered, then spoke with calm precision. The forest outside the city, the Munchido woods. There the assassins cannot follow so easily, but we must move quickly and we must not be separated. One step apart and we are lost. They moved like shadows themselves, slipping past the empty streets of Aranthia, their footsteps silent on the wet stone. The king noted, as he had many times before, how confident she was in danger. There was no hesitation, no fear, only purpose. Yet he also saw the weight she carried, the burden of knowledge, the threads of her family curse, and the awareness of the forces she could not control. As they entered the forest, the moonlight filtered through twisted branches, casting jagged shadows on the forest floor. Every rustle, every movement in the darkness made them tense. The Munchido woods were said to be alive with spirits of vengeance, creatures that fed on fear and uncertainty. Travelers who entered unprepared often disappeared, claimed by whispers in the trees and shadows that twisted the mind. Selene led them deeper, her voice barely above a whisper. The shadows here are not merely dangerous, they are testing us. They sense fear, doubt, and hesitation. We must be certain in our thoughts, certain in our trust of each other, or the woods will consume us. The king followed, his senses heightened. He felt a strange exhilaration, the kind that comes from standing on the edge of peril, and knowing that survival depends on more than just strength. It depends on courage, trust, and intelligence. Every step he took was measured, yet he found himself glancing at Selene more than once, drawn to the determination in her movements, the sharpness of her eyes, the subtle grace in the way she carried herself even amidst danger. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows, a phantom-like assassin cloaked in darkness. The king stepped forward, drawing his sword in a single, fluid motion, the steel glinting faintly in the moonlight. Selene moved beside him, her hands weaving gestures that glimmered with faint magic, creating barriers of light that deflected the attack. The assassin struck again and again, faster than any human could move, but together, the king and Selene moved as one, anticipating each other's actions, their bond deepening in the heat of danger. After a tense struggle, the assassin dissipated into mist, leaving only silence and the faint echo of whispered threats. Selene exhaled, her hands trembling slightly. "They will not give up," she said. "Not until one of us falls, or until they succeed in destroying the king." He sheathed his sword, his eyes on her. "And you," he asked quietly, "will you fall?" She met his gaze without flinching. "I do not fear death," she said, "but I do fear failure, and I will not fail while you are alive." For the first time, the king felt something stir in his chest, a warmth he had not known in years. Her courage was not reckless, it was deliberate, focused, and selfless, and it was terrifying in its intensity. They pressed on, deeper into the woods, until they reached a small clearing bathed in silver moonlight. Here, the forest seemed to breathe around them, the shadows twisting and shifting like living things. Selene paused, her expression solemn. "The curse," she said quietly. "I must tell you more. You need to understand what binds me and why I cannot simply walk away from this danger. My family's curse has followed me all my life. It marks those with power and it tests them. You are marked as well, your heart, your choices, even your strength. If you fail to confront your own darkness, the curse will claim you both." The king studied her, noting the weight of her words, the honesty and pain behind them. He had faced curses before, but none like this, none that intertwined so closely with trust, loyalty, and inner strength. He reached out, his hand brushing hers briefly. "Then we face it together," he said. "If the curse wants one of us to break, let it see that we will not break alone." Selene's breath caught at his words. She had prepared for danger, for betrayal, for shadows that would test her resolve, but not for this. Not for the vulnerability she saw reflected in him, nor the promise of partnership and shared strength. Their connection deepened as they moved through the forest, navigating traps both magical and natural, confronting illusions that tested their fears. Shadows of past mistakes whispered in their ears, ghostly visions of people they had hurt, allies they had lost, choices they had made. Each illusion forced them to confront the parts of themselves they had tried to hide, to face vulnerability and courage simultaneously. At one point, Selene stumbled over a root and fell, and the king caught her in his arms. Their eyes met in the dim moonlight, and for a moment the world fell away. There was no danger, no prophecy, no curse, only the weight of the moment and the quiet electricity between them. Selene's pulse raced, and the king felt a strange pull in his chest, an acknowledgement of feelings neither had allowed themselves to name. But there was no time for indulgence. The forest whispered warnings, shadows stirred, and movement in the trees reminded them that danger had not ended. They pressed on, reaching a glimmering pond where the reflection of the moon danced like silver fire on the water. Here the spirits of the forest rose, testing their courage once more. Ghostly forms of previous kings and queens, bound by failures and betrayals, circled them in silent accusation. The king stepped forward, his voice steady and commanding. "We face our shadows together," he said, and Selene mirrored his stance. In that act, their bond became something more than convenience. It became a promise, fragile but unbreakable. The spirits drew back, fading into mist, acknowledging the strength of their unity. And then, as silence settled over the clearing, a sudden force struck Selene. She cried out, clutching her chest as if an invisible hand had gripped her heart. The king lunged to her side, his mind racing, panic mixing with rage. "It is the curse," she whispered, her voice strained. "It tests me, it tests us." The king's heart pounded. "I will not let it claim you," he said fiercely. "Whatever it takes, I will stand with you." Selene's eyes softened, gratitude and something more flickering in their depths. She knew that the king's words were not mere speech. They were a vow, a promise that had the power to anchor her in the storm of magic and shadows. And for the first time she felt the warmth of trust, unbroken and whole. Together they faced the remaining shadows, navigating the forest until the first light of dawn crept through the trees. The city was far behind them now, and for a moment the world felt silent, waiting, as if holding its breath for the next trial. Yet the king and Selene knew that their journey was far from over. The curse lingered, the assassins would return, and the prophecy's warning remained. One heart must break to save the kingdom. As they paused at the edge of the forest, Selene turned to him, her eyes steady. "We are stronger together," she said, "but the curse is patient. It waits, and soon it will test us again, more harshly than before." The king nodded, a strange determination settling in his chest. "Then we will meet it together," he said. "Whatever comes, we face it as one, and we do not break." In that moment the bond between them deepened, no longer defined solely by survival, trust, or strategy, but by something that neither dared yet name. A connection forged in danger, strengthened by courage, and tempered by shared vulnerability. And as the morning light touched the edges of the Munchido woods, casting silver across the forest floor, the shadows stirred one final time. The assassins, the schemers, and the unseen forces of the curse all watched, waiting for the moment to strike again. But for now, the King of Thorns and the courageous Waitress stood together, ready to face whatever came next, bound by fate, by trust, and by the quiet, undeniable pull of something neither could yet fully understand. The city of Aranthia would soon know that its king was not alone, that the shadows did not move unchecked, and that the bond between the King of Thorns and Selene was a force that even the darkest magic might struggle to overcome. And somewhere deep in the forest, the first whispers of a new trial began to stir, A reminder that love, trust, and courage must always be tested in a world of shadows and prophecy, and that even hearts as strong as theirs could not escape the coming storm. Dawn broke over Aranthea, with a faint silver glow, spilling through the towers and alleys in scattered beams. Yet the city, for all its golden spires and shining streets, felt empty, as though it held its breath. Danger had not left, it had only paused, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The King of Thorns and Selene knew this, each carrying the weight of the prophecy that haunted them. One heart must break to save the kingdom. They had returned from the Munchido woods, battered but alive, their bond forged through danger, trust, and the quiet intensity of unspoken emotion. Yet the curse still lingered, whispering its threats and testing their strength. Selene's eyes, usually steady and sharp, betrayed the faintest trace of fear as she led the king toward the hidden temple at the edge of the city, where the curse had first taken root centuries ago. "This is where it began," she said softly, her voice almost lost in the morning wind. "Here we must confront it, or it will claim more than just the kingdom. It will claim us." The king followed, his cloak brushing the wet grass beneath their feet. He had faced armies, conspiracies, and curses before, but none had challenged him like this. The danger was not in force or skill. It was in the heart, in truth, in the courage to face one's own darkness and admit vulnerability. And for the first time, he realized that he could not do this alone. Inside the ancient temple, the air was thick with magic, old and potent. Runic symbols glimmered faintly on the stone walls, and a low hum resonated through the hall, vibrating against their bones. Shadows twisted and writhed along the edges of their vision, forming shapes that were almost human, almost alive. Selene paused, placing a hand on the king's arm. "Stay close," she whispered. "This is where the curse tests hearts. It feeds on doubt, on fear, on secrets. It will force you to confront everything you've hidden, everything you have avoided. Only together can we survive it." The king nodded, feeling a shiver run through him. He had never admitted weakness, never let anyone see the cracks beneath his armor. But now, facing the pulse of ancient magic, he understood that strength alone would not save them. Trust, courage, and a willingness to be honest with each other were the only weapons he could wield. The first wave of the curse struck like a tidal wave of memories and illusions. The king saw visions of his past betrayals, the nobles he had crushed, the friends he had abandoned, the countless lives he had affected through fear and ambition. Each vision was sharper, more piercing than the last, and he stumbled under the weight of his own guilt. Beside him, Selene faced her own trials. She saw her family's legacy, the burden of the curse that had haunted her for generations, the moments when she had failed to prevent harm despite her knowledge and skill. Shadows whispered her deepest fears, that she might be powerless, that her presence might bring ruin to those she loved. The king turned to her, his hand brushing hers instinctively. "We face it together," he said firmly. "No illusions, no lies, only truth." Selene nodded, drawing strength from his words. Together they stepped forward, weaving their courage and vulnerability into a shield against the curse's assault. The temple walls shivered, the runes flaring brighter as if acknowledging their defiance. Then came the final test. From the center of the hall, a shadow rose, an ancient, spectral figure cloaked in darkness, its eyes glowing with malice. It was the embodiment of the curse itself, a reflection of every fear, every failure, every wound they had ever carried. Its voice echoed through the chamber, chilling and powerful. "One heart must break," it intoned, "or the kingdom will fall. One must surrender all, or all is lost." Selene faltered, the weight of the prophecy pressing upon her. The king stepped forward, placing himself between her and the shadow. "I will not let you take her," he said. "Whatever it wants, it will find no weakness here. We do not break alone." The shadow's form surged forward and the room erupted in chaos. Darkness clashed with light as Selene conjured protective barriers, and the king struck with both sword and courage. The magic of the temple twisted around them, reacting to the strength of their hearts and the bond they shared. The shadow lashed out, striking at the king's heart, probing for fear, but he met it with unflinching resolve, his hand finding Selene's. "Together," he said, and she nodded. The words were a promise, a lifeline, a weapon. They pressed forward, stepping into the center of the hall where the shadow loomed largest. It tried to tear them apart, forcing them to face their deepest fears individually, but their unity was stronger than its power. They shared their truths aloud, regrets, fears, desires, and vulnerabilities, and in doing so they stripped the curse of its strength. The shadow screamed, a sound like cracking stone and rushing wind, then shivered and began to collapse. Its form disintegrated into mist, leaving only silence and the faint scent of ozone. The temple was calm again, the runes dimmed, and the air felt lighter, almost sacred. Selene sank to the floor, exhausted but smiling faintly. The king knelt beside her, brushing wet hair from her face. "You held your heart," he said softly. "You did not break." "Neither did you," she replied. There was a moment of quiet, a fragile pause where the weight of the trials and the relief of survival mingled with something deeper, something neither dared to speak aloud yet. As they rose, the first rays of sunlight pierced the temple's high windows, spilling light across the floor and illuminating the king in a way that made him seem less fearsome, less distant, and more human than ever before. He looked at Selene, and in that glance there was gratitude, admiration, and an unspoken acknowledgement of the bond that had grown stronger than magic, fear, or prophecy. They left the temple together, stepping into the streets of Aranthia. The city had not changed, but they had. Their hearts were lighter, their connection undeniable, and their understanding of each other profound. The king felt a warmth he had not known for decades, the warmth of trust, of shared strength, of potential love, and he did not try to hide it. Selene walked beside him, her head held high, aware that her family's curse had been lifted, at least in part, and that she had faced not only the danger of the world but the darkness within herself. She had found in the king not only an ally but someone who could see her fully, who could stand with her against shadows both literal and metaphorical. The city watched in quiet anticipation, unaware of the battles that had been fought in its heart, unaware that two lives had been intertwined forever by courage, trust, and the willingness to confront fear. And though the shadow of danger had passed for now, the prophecy lingered in memory, a reminder that challenges would return as they always did. Yet the king and Selene faced the future together, fortified by everything they had endured. That evening, as twilight fell and lanterns flickered across the city streets, the king and Selene stood on a balcony overlooking Aranthia. The golden light of the setting sun reflected off the towers, casting long shadows and painting the city in hues of fire and shadow. The king reached for Selene's hand and she took it without hesitation. "We have survived," he said softly. "The curse, the shadows, the prophecy, and yet we are still here, together." "Together," she repeated, and in her eyes he saw not only relief but a quiet, growing affection, tempered by respect and the shared understanding of what they had endured. For a long moment, they watched the city, silent but connected, aware that the battles of life were never fully over, yet strengthened by the bond they had forged. Each heartbeat was a reminder that courage, trust, and love could triumph even in the darkest of times, and that redemption was possible when hearts were willing to face themselves honestly. The first stars of night blinked into existence, sparkling like distant promises in the deepening sky. Somewhere beyond the city, the wind whispered through the trees and towers, carrying echoes of old magic, unfinished business, and the faintest hint of future challenges. Yet the King of Thorns and the courageous Waitress stood firm, hand in hand, ready to meet whatever came next. And in that quiet, fragile moment, the city of Aranthia felt smaller, gentler, less threatening. For the power of two hearts united against darkness had changed something invisible yet undeniable. The king, once feared and untouchable, now understood that strength was not measured by fear or control, but by the courage to trust and the willingness to love. Selene, once burdened by a curse she could neither see nor escape, now felt freedom in her heart. She had faced danger, magic, and shadows, and in doing so had discovered the truth of herself and of the king who stood beside her. Together, they had transformed fear into courage, uncertainty into trust, and isolation into connection. And though the city would continue to move, to thrive, to hide secrets, and to challenge those who dared to rule it, for the first time, the King of Thorns and Selene could face it unafraid. The curse had tested them, the prophecy had warned them, and the shadows had threatened them. But together they had overcome. The night deepened and the city exhaled, quiet at last. The king and Selene lingered on the balcony, gazing at the horizon where sky met stone, hearts steady and intertwined. Somewhere in the wind, there was the faintest whisper of future trials, a reminder that their journey was not yet complete. Yet for now, they had faced the darkness, survived, and discovered something eternal: the strength to endure, the courage to love, and the redemption that comes when hearts face both shadow and light. And with that, the tale of the King of Thorns and the brave, steadfast waitress reached a moment of quiet triumph, a pause in the eternal dance of shadows and light, leaving the city, and the world changed forever.